So let's talk through some enormous rules leaks for the Black Templars. We've got some nice buffs to their mastercrafted power swords, an interesting lone operative Emperor's Champion, rules for the Crusade Ancient, lots of detachment details, and a unique datasheet for the Land Raider Crusader. Let's round up the biggest changes from their new codex. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Black Templars, and in this video rounding up some of the biggest and most obvious changes from their new book. This one's really quite a big release week for Warhammer 40k. Black Templars and Grey Knights both having their codexes go live, plus a whole bunch of new models and combat patrols, all going up for pre-order on Saturday. For the Black Templars, alongside their regular stuff, they've got two new characters, a Crusade Ancient and an Execrator Chaplain. Maybe not big centerpiece models, but I feel like they're nice enough and pretty well done as support characters go, with their rules out in their new codex supplement. There's no big Battle Force box set for the Templars this time, but instead there's the Combat Patrol box, this one's Sword Brethren, Crusader Squad, Blade Guard Veterans, and the Emperor's Champion. Generally this one's been fairly well received by Templar players, a fair amount of points in the box set, and both of their unique infantry units, which I think is a real positive. Perhaps a box that could be tempting enough to get multiple of, though you'd have to kit bash one Emperor's Champion into something else. It's not the hardest thing to do though, with the sheer amount of spare parts that you get in the box. As ever, if you were looking to pick up any of the new stuff, the channel's affiliate discount retailer is linked down in the video description. There's Element Games in the UK for 15% off, plus another couple of alternatives linked alongside. Gap Games in Australia for 21%, Fenris Workshop in Canada for 10%, Wargame Portal for 15% in the USA, and Tash and Geldeep for 16 to 20% off in Germany and the EU. The box sets will be going live at these times, midnight in North America and then between 10 and midday in the rest of the world. Hopefully the Templar miniatures should be in at least fairly good supply. Individual stores could easily run out of certain things though. In any case, a big thank you to anyone picking things up through the links in the video description. It does go to help support Auspex Tactics and keep the videos coming. Let's get into Templar rules changes though, as it seems that details of the codex have been fairly widely shared across the internet at this point. Looks like multiple different text leaks all backing each other up, so most of the changes from index to codex have been identified and confirmed. A big thank you to Implausible Nature, the Black Templar YouTube channel as well, for a little help with this one. You can find them linked in the video description below if you'd like to check them out. In any case, let's get into the Black Templar rules. As Games Workshop had previewed earlier in the week, the Templars don't get Oath of Moment, instead they get Templar Vows, a similar sort of mechanic to the index rule for their detachment. Choose one of 4 different buffs at the start of the battle, though in reality the vast majority of Templar lists, I suspect, will choose accept any challenge no matter the odds most of the time, as this one's an enormous and helpful direct boost to your melee prowess, a +1 to wound to melee weapons if the defender's toughness is equal or higher than your strength. Previously I misread that one as being higher toughness, but it also works on equal toughness, so if you have some strength 4 chainsword attacks going into enemy space marines, then you'll be wounding them on 3s. It's a really big and very easy to use general purpose damage buff. If you're going for a fairly melee focused Black Templar army, I feel like it's probably going to be a pretty reasonable trade-off for Oath of Moment, a really powerful damage boost, and also one that you can use in multiple places on the board, not just one. And really quite good for their unique units, with Sword Brethren and Crusader squads both being lower on the strength side of things. Particularly in combination with the Sword Brethren getting easy lethal hits now, it means that they'll punch up really hard still. Obviously it's not the only one as well. If it isn't going to be useful in a game, then there's 3 others that you might enjoy. Maybe the sticky objectives one being the most reliably helpful out of those. One thing that I suspected might happen with the Templar update is that mastercrafted power swords have got a bit punchier. Generally for all their unique units, if they have a power sword, then it is a mastercrafted power sword now, and that means that the profile that they strike at is strength 5, AP 2, damage 2 with lethal hits. That applies to things like the Castellan and Martial datasheets, and the base weapons for the Sword Brethren as well. They get 3 attacks at that profile, so really quite general purpose and punchy. Astartes Chainswords for the Templars just get sustained hits baked in as well, so a bit more volume attacks against enemy hordes. It has been a side grade for the Crusader squad it would seem though. They've dropped down to 4 attacks from 5, so overall they're going to have fairly similar output, but still more than your average Space Marine with a chainsword. I don't know if they were trying to make them a little bit more viable for the units that can choose either, like Sword Brethren or the Castellan, but for anything that can choose between them, strength 5, AP 2, damage 2 and lethal hits is just going to win out against the vast majority of targets. Obviously not quite as good against 1 wound infantry, but you're fairly good against them anyway. One thing I was wondering was whether or not they'd be locking characters and squads to Templar only things. For Space Wolves, their unique character datasheets could only lead unique Space Wolf squads, and vice versa. Their unique squads can only be led by unique Space Wolf characters, so you couldn't have a captain joining Bloodclaws, or a chaplain joining Wolfguard Headtakers for example. It did feel a bit annoying and arbitrary, particularly given that a captain might be a way to represent a Wolf Lord, for example, for the Space Wolves, so it felt weird that they couldn't join the Space Wolf elites. In any case, it seems that for the Black Templars that hasn't happened. The Crusader squad and Sword Brethrens can still be attached as if they were intercessors, and while their unique characters can't access the entirety of the Space Wolf datasheet roster, they can still attach to things like intercessors and the things that they could before, so they don't really seem to have lost anything. Talking of mainline units, it feels like they maybe had some side grades as opposed to upgrades, but both seem interesting. As mentioned, there was the chainsword change for the Crusaders. The Sword Brother in the unit gets the Mastercrafted Power Weapon profile, and otherwise for datasheet rules they've lost the Scouts keyword, so they'll be starting on the board as per normal, but they have gained a massive Great Big Surge move similar to Khorne Berserkers. They move d6 plus 2 inches if they're shot and lose a casualty. So basically they're going to be super intimidating to fight on the midboard. You're not going to be able to move things close to them unless they can stand up to the unit in melee. That's pretty scary with the sheer amount of melee attacks they can be hitting out, which are likely to be +1 to wound against anything that's toughness 4 or higher, as well as having attached characters in the squad most likely. For the Sword Brethren's part, as rumoured, it does look like they've lost the +1 damage buff that they could get, a slightly more niche special rule in my opinion, where they get to move normally when the enemy falls back. Not unhelpful, but far less of a direct damage boost. Otherwise, for their datasheets, it's reported that they can be fielded in 4s and 9s now. Their base profiles gain +1 weapon skill, so they hit on a 2+ for most of their weapons and a 3+ for their Thunderhammer. As mentioned, their base Mastercrafted Power Weapons, they change to 3 attacks, Strength 5, AP 2, Damage 2 and lethal hits. So I guess overall the squad might be hitting a little bit less harder. The Lightning Claws and the Thunderhammer lose damage compared with what they would have had before, but will be hitting more accurately. The base guys are more or less an upgrade though, the same number of damage but hitting more accurately and also getting lethal hits thrown in. Overall still looks like they're going to be very interesting as a damage dealer unit, again particularly considering that they're going to have +1 to wound against a whole bunch of tough targets. Next up we've got the Crusade Ancient. This one's maybe a partially confirmed datasheet. I've not confirmed every keyword, but it's what we have so far. It's listed at points in the codex at 65 points reportedly. They can lead the Crusader and Sword Brethren units, and they can join units that have a Captain, Chapter Master, Lieutenant or Execrator attached. For its base melee, it's perhaps punchier than you might expect. 5 attacks that hit on a 2+ with the Mastercrafted Power Weapon profile, and honestly that's a fair bit stronger in melee than I might have expected it to be. And the main buff that it provides the unit is a 4+ chance to fight on death. Quite a nasty rule if you happen to be fighting against melee armies, not going to matter too much against gun lines though. Otherwise, it seems that it doesn't have the +1 OC that a bunch of other Ancients have. Instead, it trades out for a personal +5 OC the first time this model's unit destroys an enemy in melee, which certainly doesn't feel quite as directly useful to me. The nice melee stat line's interesting to see. Fights on death is really big against certain armies, though it's a bit painful buying in a character that's going to be good against some, but fairly bad against others. I feel like for most units that you might want to lead, other characters are going to be the better choice, unless you may be trying to build around the Ancient detachment. Speaking of which, that one's called the Vindication Task Force. As previewed earlier in the week, that's the one that gives you -1 to wound for squads with the Ancient keyword that are on objectives, and the Crusader squads can use their Righteous Zeal Surge to go towards objectives if they want to, rather than the closest units. For stratagems, a lot of them are also locked to the Ancient keyword. You can revive one on death with 4 wounds, which could potentially stop them from being sniped out. There's a -1 to hit at range for an Ancient unit, which could double down on a unit being extra survivable. If the opponent does destroy an Ancient, then there's a +1 to hit against them for the rest of the game, presuming you didn't choose to revive the Ancient, of course. There's extra AP against units on objectives, ignoring hit modifiers and cover 1, and a 2 command point 1 to charge out of sequence. One of those essentially heroic intervention ones against things that didn't charge. That could potentially be a big surprise move for Crusader squads after they've done one of their Righteous Zeal Surges. For the enhancements, maybe the most interesting one looks like Deep Strike for the Bearers unit, which is kind of unusual. You could do some rapid ingress delivery for Sword Brethren or something there if you'd like. There's a Crusade Ancient that can allow you to fight on death on a 3+, a -2 to charges for an Ancient, and a 5+ invulnerable save buff to a squad. It does seem like some fun stuff, but also seems just very heavily centered around Games Workshop trying to sell you their new Ancient model. The Templars still have their variant tanks in the codex, so the Primaris chassis ones that you can bolt on the multi-melter to, and they also have a unique datasheet for the Land Raider Crusader. Most of the rules and stat lines for it are exactly the same as the normal one. It still has the big transport capacity, the Hurricane bolters, moves 12 inches and can move, drop and then allow you to charge. It just gets one big bonus special rule on top of that. That special rule basically gives you a big damage buff against one unit that the Templar Land Raider has shot, so if you've scored at least 1 hit on the unit, then models that disembarked from the Land Raider Crusader this turn gets 2 reroll 1s to hit and wound against that target. That's a genuinely solid damage buff, usually equating to around about 36% extra damage, depending on whether or not you've got some lethal hits and things going on. As applies for the rest of the turn, so both shooting and fighting there. It still feels like Sword Brethren are going to have some absolutely crazy damage output with some attached characters, their lethal hit power weapons, and their +1 to wounds, and maybe this on the go. Otherwise, most of the Templar Gladiator tanks are kind of similar. It appears that their Repulsor and Repulsor Executioner have also got some different special rules though, these ones replacing the tank's basic rules. In addition to this, they'll still get the bolt-on multi-melters too. Out of the two of them, the Repulsor Executioner seems by far the more interesting one. This one now allows you to re-roll hit rolls against targets that are within 12 inches of friendly models, so push up with some Templar Crusaders, or deep strike something behind the lines to do secondary objectives and things, and potentially set this tank up for some big boosted damage. Overall, it's really quite a nice boosting special rule, way better than the standard datasheet one that the standard Space Marine variant gets. It does feel like kind of a trade-off for losing Oath of Moment though. As I guess in other armies, you could be accessing reroll hit rolls fairly easily on your most important target for your big guns, though I guess at the expense of not using Oath of Moment elsewhere. Still seems interesting though. I feel like it's going to make it a far more interesting fire support tank compared with some of the rest for the Templars. Otherwise, the Repulsor has a different datasheet rule as well. That one gives you a reactive 6-inch disembark after your tank has just been shot. That one feels like a bit more of a niche special rule. I suppose it could allow you to set units up for a heroic intervention, or even I guess that charge out of sequence stratagem potentially, or have some Crusaders jump onto an objective to hold us against the enemy. A lot of the time though, it's just going to make more sense to have them remain in the safety of the tank to get out, shoot and charge in your turn. To go with their Lang Raider crusading ways, the Templars get a Godhammer Assault Force detachment, which is their transport focused one. The core rule of this one is a damage buff. Enemy units charged by things that jumped out of transports have to test Battle Shock when they get charged, and you also get a +1 to hit in melee for units that disembark from transports too. It's definitely not a bad datasheet rule, though maybe a bit disappointing that it's going to have limited value with Sword Brethren. Hitting on 2s means that one of the units that you most want to benefit from a melee buff isn't really going to very much, though I guess could be nice enough for other things like Primaris Crusaders or Blade Guard I suppose. For stratagems, there's a 6-inch normal move for an infantry unit that slew something and is now out of engagement range. You can use that to re-embark if you hadn't disembarked this turn. There's one to jump 6 inches out of a Land Raider that hasn't moved, and you can do so directly into an engagement range if it made sense. Maybe thwarting enemy overwatch or something, though I feel like most of the time you'd be better off just jumping out and charging normally. There's a vehicle moves through terrain one, which would be nice enough for dreadnoughts, though good for Land Raiders bearing dangerous cargo. There's one for a disembarking unit that can charge through enemy models, potentially being able to get over enemy screens if the enemy unit behind the screen is easy enough to reach. There's a nice damage buff one of reroll 1s to wound for a disembarking unit when fighting, or all wound rolls if you charged out of a Land Raider. That one seems like it could be absolutely brutal with the stacking buffs that you can have. Potentially +1 to wound on your unit, and rerolling all wounds means that even Chainswords will be wounding anything in the game most of the time. And there's a 2 command point one for a -1 damage for a vehicle in your shooting phase. That's to make a Land Raider significantly harder to take down. I noticed these ones are lacking armour of contempt like the Space Wolves are as well. Seems that the Black Templars won't be having that in their unique detachments. Otherwise, for enhancements, there's one for a +2 strength in melee, and a +1 damage as well if it disembarked this turn. One of your characters can nominate an enemy unit within 12 inches to lose the benefit of cover. That's quite an interesting one for a Scout's 9 inches move for a dedicated transport vehicle that has a character embarked in it. That seems super threatening for an Impulsor full of Sword Brethren. Overall feels like there's enough fun stuff to make that detachment interesting. I feel like in particular that reroll wound stratagem is pretty punchy, and being able to drive vehicles through walls will be another big advantage. As well as the Templar tank variants, there's a couple of other datasheets in the Codex. It seems that in hindsight people did predict these right, and it was Sternguard and Terminator squads that are getting a unique datasheet, though they do feel like a bit of an afterthought really. They're only really in here due to the core datasheets in Codex Space Marines having a rule that interacts with Oath of Moment. If they didn't, then they wouldn't have given the Templars a unique datasheet for them. The Sternguard swap their enormous rerolls for reroll wound rolls of 1 when targeting the closest target. That's a much worse buff, but at the same time it looks like they're printed as a much cheaper points cost, just 85 points here, which is pretty cheap for them. They'd certainly be playable at that points cost, though I feel like probably niche still. And then the regular Terminator squad swaps its Fury of the First for a Desperate Escape style rule. So if the opponent tries to fall back from that, you need to test Desperate Escape if you're not a monster or vehicle. So a chance to lose some models if you want to fall back, and you have a -1 to that test if the unit's already battle shocked. Both of those I'd say feel merely okay. More side grades than upgrades, and a definite downgrade for Sternguard unless the points do drop quite as much as the Codex indicates. The Emperor's Champion got a fair few rules rewrites, several things that I feel like make him better overall. He moves 8 inches now, so could potentially be shortening the charge range of your units by ranging out the front of them. He's no longer an epic hero, but remains 1 per army, so that means that you're allowed to give him enhancements as well. Could be interesting for any other detachments that can give him a damage boost enhancement. His Black Sword gains anti-character 5+ on the strike profile for that, and once per game he can give his melee devastating wounds, so on his go turn for him, every 5+ that he scores against a character unit would deal 3 mortal wounds, so a whole bunch of damage, no questions asked. His Skillful Parry got a small upgrade as well, that now works to blanket damage against shooting phase attacks too. And perhaps one of the most interesting things of all, he's gained the option to be fielded as a lone operative. You can still have him leading a squad, but otherwise he can just be an immensely dangerous solo model to have running around. Feels like it'd be hard to go too far wrong with the sheer amount of murderous damage he can do, alongside the utility value and a fairly fast movement. He has lost the +1 to wound against character units, though given the new Templar Vows it's not the worst thing in the world. He'll still be +1 to wound against big tough stuff that'd be wounding on a 5+, and still wounding adequately well against more standard characters. If he gains all that and doesn't go up in points, then he looks like he's become a much more interesting unit, and he was already fairly efficient for the points cost before. Otherwise, the rest of the characters have had a whole bunch of changes. Helbrecht's had a couple of small changes. He no longer does the 5+ critical hits thing, which has been shifted to the Marshal. Instead, his buff is just +1 strength and +1 attack to his lead unit though, so still really quite fearsome, and +1 attack is pretty great on everything. His mortal wounds rule got more powerful as well if he's leading a big squad. Grimaldus has been toned down a bit. He no longer has the 5+ feel no pain choice for his buffing power. Instead, that's been swapped to a +1 toughness. The book points do imply that he has got cheaper though, which I guess he probably would have been. I still feel like with his little minions to tank some big damage shots, and the flexible buffs where he can flex into toughness or speed or extra AP, he'll still be nice. And he's also gained an extra attack on his Crozius as well. The Castellan's got a much more punchy melee profile, 6 attacks with that mastercrafted power weapon profile and lethal hits. He's shifted to providing hit rerolls though, rerolling hit rolls of 1 for his unit in melee, or rerolling all hits if he passes a leadership test. He's also got a 4+ chance to generate a command point if he slays a unit, so basically it's no longer a copy-paste of the Lieutenant datasheet, but if he still wanted Lieutenant rules then he could just run his rules using a Primaris Lieutenant, so in my mind he's gained options, not lost them. Then the Marshal gains the 5+ critical hits rule for a lead unit, quite good with Sword Brethren lethal hits or the Crusader squad Chainswords. He could both pair well with the regular Lieutenant for lethal hits on all the squad's attacks, or the Castellan to reroll everything that isn't a critical hit, and then things like mastercrafted power weapons in the units that Sword Brethren might have en masse could be auto-wounding most of the time. For his own punchy damage profile as well, that's been boosted too. 7 attacks at Strength 5, AP 2 and Damage 2 with lethal hits, and his once per game damage buff still exists, though it is a bit worse and dependent on having a lot of enemy models nearby. Overall still looking pretty interesting though, more personal might, and potential for a whole bunch of auto wounds or sustained hits, or potentially both. Finally, we've got the Companions of Vehemence. This one feels like it should be perhaps the most central and core Black Templars detachment, though it does seem like it's still got some datasheet keyword restrictions. A few things only really work for Chaplain and Judaseer style units. I guess you would expect a lot of those to be present in a Black Templars army, but still kind of weird to have 3 different detachments that are fairly heavily incentivized to build around certain keyworded models. In any case, the core rule for this one is just reroll advances and charges. Rarely a bad thing for an army, and that could be quite a nice one along with the Execrator Chaplain as well. His squad would really have quite a big threat range with this. Then there's a bunch of general purpose melee support stratagems, a pile-in and consolidate of 6 inches, which is nice in the right situation, precision for a unit in the fight phase, reroll 1s to hit for a unit led by Chaplain or Judaseer, and rerolling wound rolls of 1 as well if they're fighting a monster or vehicle. One that makes consolidation a bit more freeform, a surge move style one for a Chaplain or Judaseer led unit triggered when an enemy moves within 9 inches of them. That allows them to go d6 inches, and perhaps could be a big deal if you've got a fight's first unit suddenly jumping into the fray. That one does allow you to go inside engagement range, and a battle shock chest at -1 when the opponent declares a charge. If that stops them from being able to command point reroll it, I guess that could be a big deal. Otherwise, for enhancements, a Chaplain or Judaseer can grant a +1 AP to their lead unit. That seems like quite a nice melee buff. That would work well both for the Sword Brethren and the Primaris Crusaders. There's a +1 to advance rolls, and you can advance and do an action. There's one for a Chaplain or Judaseer to grant reroll hits to the bearer's unit. That's a seriously nice one on a model that already has some good advantages, and one that grants Scout 6 inches to the bearer's units, so you could still have a big chunky Crusader squad parked in the midboard. It feels like this one's a pretty solid one for general purpose melee Black Templars. Some of the enhancements actually sound like some of the best things here. You could definitely have some scary looking unit combos. In any case though, let me know your thoughts as to new Black Templar rules. What things do you think are looking good or not? Let me know down in the comments below, and which options would you be most tempted to have hitting the tabletop. I'll hopefully be aiming to go through in a bit more detail, maybe aiming to do the Codex review video as the next one. As mentioned, if you are looking to pick up any Black Templars at the weekend, and we're going to order some stuff in anyway, then feel free to check out the channel's affiliate discount links in the video description. They save money and also help to support Auspex Tactics and the videos that I make. A big thank you to anyone using them. Otherwise, subscribe to the channel if you'd like to see more like this. I do tend to keep 40k videos coming out just about every day. I'll certainly be hoping to make a few more things for the Black Templars, so subscribe or check back later if you'd like to see more. There's also the channel's Patreon page if you'd like to support. A big thank you to anyone helping out there. Channel patrons do get a few advantages, such as seeing certain videos early and entry to the monthly prize giveaways. A massive thank you for listening though, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.